then have to do something, you know. But the Buddha says it's just really foolish. That's like thinking, you know, you've never, and I should really say a dumb analogy, but it's a really good one. It's like you've never heard of car mechanics in your whole life, never knew such a system existed. And you've got this brand new car and you just drive it and drive it and drive it to the ground. And one day on the freeway, 120 Ks an hour, suddenly the wheels are falling off and you go, oh, what'll I do? Well, that's how idiotic we are. That's how we think of spiritual practice. It's only when you want to kill your husband or yourself, or things go wrong, or your COVID-19 happens, or you lose your job. It's then we go, what'll I do? You know, but it's a bit late. It's just
never, and I think it's a dumb analogy, but it's a really good one. It's like you've never heard of car mechanics in your whole life. You never knew such a system existed. And you've got a brand new car and you just drive it and drive it and drive it to the ground. And one day on the freeway, 120 Ks an hour, suddenly the wheels are falling off and you go, oh, what'll I do? Well, that's how idiotic.
What's all that about? Rain?
It's a repeat of you.
I know, what's all that about, Rain? Can we stop?
Anyone got their YouTube open at the same time?
No.
No, if not, please only run one Zoom or one YouTube at the same time.
And also mute everybody. Francis, can you mute yourself, darling?
Certainly, yeah.
Robin, can you mute yourself? Yeah, that might. We'll see what happens. Okay, so of course this is difficult, and the reason it's difficult, difficult to think that you should do something about it when you're happy. You think, well, what should I do something about what, you know? And this gets us to understand the Buddhist view about attachment and aversion. These simple words, but this is the reason. So in other words, because we've got attachment, and this is Buddha's deal, this is Buddha's diagnosis of our mental illness, he says it's called attachment. I mean, it sounds hilarious to us in our culture because it's just normal life. Attachment is what we call normal life, getting all excited when lovely things happen and being a junkie to get things happen, and, you know, to get happy things happen. We just think that's normal life. Well, Buddha says it's a mental illness, it's a disease, and it's the source of our suffering. If we look at the Buddha's view of the mind, you know, and he talks about 84,000 distinct mental problems. I keep asking everybody where the text is that shows that big map of the mind, but nobody ever seems to know. But I remember recently, Ling Rinpoche, has he been to Australia yet, Ray? Ling Rinpoche?
He has been a few times, yes.
The young Ling Rinpoche.
Young Ling Rinpoche, yes. Has visited our centre. Yeah.
Oh, wow, wonderful. Well, I remember he now, and people tell me that they have never heard this before, but he keeps saying it. You know, how they talk about all these different mental states of mind, all these afflictions, as Buddhism would call them, this kind of arcane Indian word, you know, klesha. He says that 21,000 there are three main delusions. The Buddha says all the 84,000 subsumed to three main ones: ignorance, attachment, and anger. Sounds so cute, you know, these simple words. You don't hear this from your therapist, you know. You don't go to your therapist and say, oh, I've got some attachment. They'll tell you to shut up and go home until you want to, you know, inject heroin into yourself. Then you've got a problem. So the point is the three poisons, Buddha calls them, doesn't he? The three toxic emotions, we can say. You know, I remember Ling Rinpoche says that 21,000 of those 84 are rooted in ignorance, 21,000 are rooted in attachment, 21,000 are rooted in anger, and the fourth 21,000, which equals 84,000, are rooted in all three. So it's a really intricate map, in other words, and this is what's surprising to us, because we just think these are kind of these random emotions we have. But the Buddha's view of the mind is so distinct and so clear and really mapped out beautifully, you know, and has been for several thousand years, and it's before the Buddha. These amazing Hindus came up with this picture. So anyway, and we understand these three, we really understand what being a Buddhist means. We really understand why we suffer. And therefore we understand what Buddhist practice is, you know. So attachment is effectively the main one in daily life. There are three, and the root one, as we all know, it's called ego grasping. It's a colloquial term for it, ignorance, mat-rigpa, this primordial mistake deep in the bones of our being that assumes the presence of a real, solid, concrete, pointable little mini me in here. It's a deep assumption. This is the root delusion, the root neurosis, the root mental illness. But effectively on the basis of this, the main one is attachment. But because it's so primordial and it's so pervasive and so, you know, so utterly taken so utterly at the level of instinct, that we don't notice it until it's raging. We don't notice it. And actually, even we don't notice attachment until it doesn't get what it wants. And that's when the wheels are falling off. You only notice things are going wrong when you want to kill yourself or your husband, but it's a bit late, because what's happening is attachment, when you're happy, And this is the thing we have to understand. We can spend 4 days just on this topic and the technology of it, Buddha's understanding of the technology of what happiness is and what suffering is and what triggers them and how to work with it and how to understand it. This is the heart of Buddha's teachings, you know, that when we understand attachment is this junkie in us that's deep in our bones at the level of assumption. We get born with it. We're conceived with it. The first second of conception is already in there from countless past lives of practicing it. In fact, Buddha says it's at the level of assumption. It's completely instinctive. So it's really hard to see it. So the only time we see it is when it doesn't get what it wants. This is such a simple way to put it. I remember years ago, just reading in passing from Lama Zopa, that anger is response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. You don't hear the Lama say it that often, but it's actually a huge, major point. If we could get this, we really are on track with understanding Buddhism and why we suffer. So, you know, why we're having problems now, why when we get sick or the husband leaves you or you get COVID-19 or the whole world is, you know, especially out here in Melbourne, really serious, you know, lockdowns. You can't go more than 5 kilometers. You can't be with more than one person. You get fined about $10,000 or something, or 2,000 or whatever. So when bad things happen, because we freak out, what we have to understand is what that is technically. We just take it for granted. We take it for granted. We all want happiness and we all want nice. And what we think happiness is when you get the nice things. But we don't analyze it any further. We just think, oh, that's natural. And then we think it's natural when bad things happen. We think it's natural to freak out, to be anxious, to get depressed, you know, to be angry, to lose your mind. I mean, when really bad things happen, we don't analyze it. We don't have a reason for it. We don't look underneath. This is what Buddha's good at. I mean, you know, whether you call yourself a Buddhist or not, if you really study Buddhist psychology, you've got to admire the view. It's really kind of sophisticated. I mean, it's not being sectarian, you know, it's just brilliant. And if we're going to say we're Buddhists, even 1% Buddhists, we've got to understand attachment, you know, we just have to. But it takes time because it's so subtle. So why we suffer, why things are bad, why we have anxiety, why we have panic attacks, why we get depressed, why we get angry, why we get jealous, why all these other nonsense, why is there the response to attachment not getting what it wants? So what we call happiness right now is when attachment does get what it wants, but we don't analyze it. And it really takes time because it seems initially quite a mean analysis. It's almost like Buddha's saying you're not allowed to be happy. You mean I can't even enjoy my chocolate cake? I can't even have a fun boyfriend. I'm not supposed to be happy. No, that's because we conflate attachment and happiness. You know, I remember Lama Zopa said, when we hear the Buddha says, sorry guys, you know, to get happy, you've got to give up attachment. We think it means you've got to give up happiness. Oh, you mean I'm going to give up my happiness? I'm going to give up my heart, we think, as Rinpoche says. No, we have a misunderstanding. And it's very easy to misunderstand Buddha's views. So we've got to be really precise in how we listen, and we have to have authentic teachings. You know, we all just think, oh, yeah, you go to a weekend course and you write a book about it. It's kind of rude, you know. So to understand what attachment is, and if it's the cause of our suffering, we had better know what it is. Good Lord, you know. But initially we can't hear it. It's very hard to hear. And even when we hear that we've got anger, we've got jealousy, we know we're suffering, but our trouble is our analysis would be, well, of course I'm jealous, of course I'm angry, but why am I jealous? Because my boyfriend looked at somebody else. Why am I angry? Because my boyfriend left me. So we know we're angry, we know we're jealous, we know we have anxiety, we know we have panic attacks, we know we're depressed. But the way we think in our dualistic world and our philosophical materialist, you know, scientific views of these things, we think they're the result of something bad happening. And the bad thing or person or event out there is the thing that's the cause. So that's why we naturally put all our attention on that. So, I mean, it seems fairly evident, of course, if someone punches you in the nose, if you get COVID-19, if you're fined for being out, you know, on a day, you naturally think that's the reason you're suffering. And Buddha's not disagreeing. This is quite a precise point as well. He's not disagreeing that the boyfriend punching you in the nose isn't a cause of your suffering. His point is it's not the main cause. It seems like a fine point, and it is, but it's a massive point. It's just not the main cause, that's all. And that's a very simple point. It's not the main cause, you know. Equally with happiness. For us, happiness is what we get when attachment gets what it wants. And what suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. That's Buddha's analysis. So if that's true, so you know, so the suffering, there are main causes of happiness and suffering, the Buddha's analysis, and then there are secondary causes. You know, there are main causes and there are secondary causes, and the boyfriend's punch is a secondary cause, shockingly enough, because as far as we are concerned, it's the main cause. I mean, you're lying there with COVID-19. It seems cruel and unfair and kind of shocking to say that's not the main cause of your suffering. I mean, this is, excuse me, what does Buddha think he's doing? You know, it's shocking to hear this, because everybody in the universe would say it's the sickness that's the cause of your suffering. It's the boyfriend leaving you that's the cause of your suffering. But the Buddhist analysis says, no, we haven't got it right. So what's he saying? He says it's the state of mind. It's whatever's in the mind. And this is a simple point that Buddha's made. These words are simple, but to live according to it. We could be Buddhists for 50 years and still it's incredibly hard to do this, because it's really a very subtle point and a very outrageous point. So practice is really difficult, you know. Everything in all of us is convinced that when the nice thing happens, the cake is the cause of the happiness. The good weather is the cause of the happiness. The lack of sickness is the cause of happiness. The pleasant boyfriend is the cause of happiness. It seems evident to us. But Buddha says we haven't got the right analysis. He's not being mean. He's not being fundamentalist. He's being kind. It's like you go to the doctor and you've never quite realized why you get diabetes. You think it's like something else. And she tells you, sorry, Robina, it's the sugar. I mean, just to keep a simple example, you've never realized that you haven't understood the cause of your diabetes, you know? Well, this is the Buddha's view. So he says that what goes on in the mind, what goes on in our mind is the main cause of happiness and the main cause of suffering. That's it. In fact, you could say the whole of Buddhism, this entire worldview, one way of framing it is in terms of it's a method for getting happiness and stopping suffering. Buddha says, if you check sentient beings, even just look at their behavior, the monkeys and the ants and the humans, you're going to deduce that they all want happiness and don't want suffering. This is, I mean, one way of framing the whole of Buddhism is a method for this, you know. But of course, the point for the Buddha is he's got this much more nuanced understanding of suffering and happiness. Okay, so there's different ways. There's two main ways of looking into all this technology, if you like. One is understanding the view of karma, the natural law of cause and effect. And the other one is understanding Buddhist psychology. And they come to the same thing because it's the mind that creates karma. So we have to understand karma, the technology, the nuts and bolts of the law of cause and effect. And what creates karma first and foremost is the mind. So we have to understand karma in relation to the mind, and then we have to understand the mind itself and how it functions, because we go into detail about the part of us that creates karma, which is the mind. This is the nuts and bolts of all Buddhist philosophy and psychology, really. And this is the first stages of practice. We take the Lamrim as our basis. This packaging of Buddha's teachings is unique to the Tibetans, in particular the way Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama, presents it. You know, this Lamrim, this gradual path. There's the first level of practice, what I like to call junior school, which they call the first, you know, the first scope of teachings. The teachings and practices, as Lama Zopa would politely put it, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, you know, junior school is a good shortcut. Well, that's understanding karma is junior school. And then high school is understanding the mind. So this is the nuts and bolts. And the thing is, then we've got the compassion wing. That's the wisdom wing. Then we've got the compassion wing. We have to know how to help others. But there's no way on the planet you can help others to get healthy if you don't know health. You can't help people play piano if you haven't got the wisdom to know how to play piano. You can't heal people with acupuncture until you have the wisdom to know acupuncture. You can't help people have real valid compassion and help sentient beings get happy if you don't have the nuts and bolts of how to get happy yourself. That's why junior school and high school obviously come before university, which is the compassion wing, which is the bodhisattva path, which is the point of all of it. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom, you know. So, we could start with the compassion wing just as easily, and it refers us to the wisdom wing. And we can start with the wisdom wing, which will refer us to the compassion wing, because you've got to have one for the other, you know, and also they're utterly integrated. So I think what I've noticed, this with all the COVID-19, everywhere you turn, I read the Australian newspapers and the American newspapers and the English newspapers or whatever you read from continents. You can tell I'm old because I read newspapers. I have got Facebook, but someone else sends me my messages. But I don't go immediately to social media. I go to newspapers. You can tell I'm old, isn't it? So anyway, when you read the papers, it's so interesting. During bad times like now, this is when you hear about good people. You hear about these wonderful people like chefs who are now making things for the nurses, and tailors making masks for people, and good, wonderful stories. It's so uplifting. It's so interesting. And that's the compassion side. You can see it so often in bad times. You hear it when you read about the Second World War, when you hear about any bad times. The incredible stories of amazing human beings practicing compassion, reaching out to others. It's so extraordinary. And one of the interesting points, like if we listen to Lama Zopa's teachings, all he ever goes on about is compassion, isn't it? I mean, he doesn't go about the wisdom wing. He doesn't bother about renunciation. He doesn't even bother. That's finished. He talks about compassion. And actually, that's the really profound way to get happy. When you're compassionate and loving and kind, that's when you're happy. And this is an interesting point. And this is the point that Buddha's making. And I think we can prove this. This is proof. We can prove when you could see someone who is more attached, angry, jealous, fearful, and join the universe here. Don't be critical. Predominantly, those states of mind are prevailing in their mind. It's evident that person is really not happy. You don't have to hear what happened to them. You just hear their sadness, hear their unhappiness, hear their anger. It's obvious a person's not happy. If you see a person, even in bad times like now, who's loving, compassionate, and kind, they're beaming. So, but this is so evident, but we don't join the dots, We just think it's kind of an accident. So we know there are some people who are poor, homeless, struggling, sick, who are happy. We just don't join the dots. We don't get it. We just think they're an accident because we're so addicted to believing I have the right to be unhappy because the boyfriend left me. I have the right to be unhappy because I've got COVID-19. This is how we think. So these assumptions are very deep in our mind, and it's really powerful to question them, which is what we're trying to do here as Buddhists, So it's evident, and this is the point the Buddha's making, because when you look at the Buddhist model of the mind, the psychological model, the contents of our mind, and Buddha would describe these 84,000 neuroses, then 84,000 virtues that counteract them, not to mention the third category of states of mind, like the mechanics of our mind, like concentration, good memory, many, many of these. When we look at all these states of mind, when we look at the first two, it's really simple. There are those that are neurotic, deluded, disturbed, unhappy, afflicted, you name it. Lama Yeshe in his Mahamudra book identified 21 synonyms, half of which Lama made up, just to get us to see and identify these crazy states of mind, which is Buddha's expertise. So these are unhappy. In their nature, they're unhappy. In their nature, just the having of depression is disturbing. To whom? To me. Just the having of it. And this, even though we can prove it, we're so addicted in our culture. We're so addicted. We so totally believe that anger, yes, I'm angry and I'm disturbed because that. I'm happy. We don't look at the state of mind itself. And that's the brilliance of Buddhist psychology. That is the incredible directness of the approach in Buddhism. The thing we do is we know we're angry, we know we're anxious, and we have to find something and pinpoint something out there. Pinpoint it. And if we don't know what it is when we go to our therapist, we have to go back into the past, looking for this needle in a haystack. There, aha, now we found it. That is what is now causing Robina to be depressed. That is when it started. That's the logic we tend to use. Buddha says it's fine to do that. It can be helpful to you, but you're not getting to the point. The point in Buddhism is so direct. It's really quite shocking, but it's extremely hard to do. It's the very state of mind itself that we have to identify. And that's hard. Why? Is because we think it's physical for a start. And that's because we only notice it when the body gets involved. We don't notice it when it's more subtle. That's like the wheels when they begin to wobble, because you're not paying attention to the car, because you have this assumption of a self-existent new car and no idea or thought that it ever could go wrong. And you only notice the wheels when they completely fall off. That's how we are with ourselves. We take ourselves for granted, So we don't look into the mind. And then when we do, what we think of when we have the anger or the depression, we think they're physical, because it's only when our body is involved that we notice our mind. This is the part that's truly fascinating. In other words, you only notice you had wheels when they started to fall off. This is such a good analogy. So we have to learn to pay attention before they fall off. We have to learn to pay attention to these emotions before they become emotional. So you don't wait till your husband leaves you to deal with your emotions. You don't wait till you get COVID-19. You don't wait till the wheels fall off. This is the simple, simple, simple point that Buddha's making. And it's supremely intelligent, because we can guarantee, can't we, that things will go wrong at some point in life. That's everybody in the universe's experience. From history, from your own life, from your mother's life, everybody's life is like that. We can see that at some point things will go wrong. So why not be prepared for it, you know? And how you do that is by working on your mind. And what part of your mind? By working on attachment and aversion. It's really almost too simple. The words are too simple. You think, oh, that can't be that easy. It isn't easy, but it's simple. The analysis is simple. But even that's interesting. You know, I'm having a discussion with a friend, an American, who talks about having, for example, these different diseases we talk about in the West. And this is a really interesting conversation, you know. He says he's got ADHD, attention deficit. What's the H for?
Hyperactive.
Thank you. Attention deficit, maybe that one, disorder. And I remember we had a discussion about it a while ago. And I basically said, stop identifying with that label, you know? So I said, Buddha's got a brilliant analysis. You're a Buddhist. Why don't, I mean, you know, and we had this discussion just recently. I said, it's a question of the language we use. This is a really interesting point, actually. And there's such a contradiction for many Buddhists, you know, because we take psychology, when it's modern psychology and neuroscience based, as something serious and proven. But we tend to think Buddhism is kind of like religion, not really proved. You can't prove it. And it seems like kind of cute. It's very fascinating. The number of people I know, including Buddhists, who think like this, you know. But it's a question of what language you use. So first of all, the mistake with this person, I said, you made a mistake. You chucked, you know, because when I said don't identify with ADHD, I didn't mean don't think you've not got a problem. Yeah, you've got a problem. Join the universe. Buddha happens to call it attachment. And attachment's multifaceted. We've got 72 different terms in the West for the one thing called attachment because it's multifaceted. That means you have to learn it very well. It's got many symptoms. So one is attention deficit. One is, you know, compulsive something or other. One is is the grosser level of attachment is overeating, or too much sex, or too much drugs, or too much rock and roll, or too much music, craving for something. It's multifaceted, you know, and it's really quite a sophisticated understanding of this simple word. So, but I said, I didn't say, don't think you don't have a problem. Yeah, you have, join the universe. But it's a question of whose language, which doctor's analysis you want to use. I said, I happen to prefer Dr. Buddha. I like Buddha's analysis. But we don't often see that. We just think, well, Buddhism's something else, you know. Psychology is real and Buddhism is sort of other thing. Oh, you know, I've got an affliction. It's like it's a unique thing for the Buddha. We're not seeing. It's just a different language, you know. We've got a body and we have a mind. Neuroscientists talk about ADHD because the brain has got some kind of something. But we even, you know, but the Buddha says, if you like if you take the Vajrayana model, which is the model of the Tibetan medical system, you've got body and mind also, and mind and body and mind are intimately linked also. But the physical energy they're talking about that's out of whack isn't the brain. They're not discussing the brain. They're discussing the different subtle wind energies. It's the same system as Ayurvedic. It's the same system as the Chinese one. You know, there's this really sophisticated understanding of the subtle physical energies that are linked to the mind. So it's up to which language we prefer to use, you know. Okay, I like to use Buddha's. I like to use Buddha's language. And we've got to see how they kind of join. But part of the problem, I also said to this friend, of us in the materialist view, because we're so fixated on the brain, because we're so fixated on the physical, and we take that as being real. But when we think of the mind, we think it's just kind of this wishy-washy thing. You know, we don't take it so seriously. And then we think it's set in stone. I've got ADHD or whatever it's called. I've got another, whatever they're called, you know. It's like, I've got bipolar, someone says. And it's like a physical disease. And if it's physical, it's like having a leg missing. You just can't fix it. But we know even now the scientists have discovered the greatest finding of the 20th century, one scientist said, neuroplasticity. We're not stuck with the brain we're born with. And what helps you change your brain? Guess what? Do what Buddha says, change your mind, babe. And that's all the Buddha's saying. The body and the mind are intimately connected. We might have only one leg. We might have a piece of brain missing. We might have the imbalance of chemicals that the doctors say is why we get depressed. We might have some piece of the brain that causes to have ADHD or whatever it's called. This is not wrong. So it's a question of how you hear it and what you think you're going to do about it. But we tend to think, oh my God, I've got this disease and I'm stuck with it, very concrete. And then the other thing we do, we're in our very dualistic kind of guilty way, we think, oh, now I know why I'm depressed. I've got a chemical imbalance. And then what we're really saying is, oh, phew, it's not my fault. Oh my gosh, I'm off the hook now. That's the view of ego. That's very fascinating. And don't blame your Catholic mummy or your Jewish mummy for that. We all have that. We run to trying to find a reason why I'm depressed, angry, jealous. Of course I'm jealous. My husband cheats on me. Of course I'm depressed. I've got an imbalance of chemicals. Of course I've got ADHD because I've got a missing piece of my brain or whatever it might be. So but these aren't wrong, but we overemphasize the physical as if somehow now it's not my fault. It's very deep and instinctive, that view. It's very fascinating. It's perfectly fine. It's like saying you're outside in the freezing cold weather. Out there, it's pretty chilly. And if I'm shivering, oh, well, it's not my fault. It's cold weather. It's true. It's true. It is cold and does impact upon you. The chemicals do impact upon you. Your missing brain impacts upon you. The berserk wind energies impact upon you, whatever the analysis is. But the fundamental point, yes, we are impacted by the brain, by the mind, by the winds, by whatever you want to call it, by the weather, because the mind and the body are interdependent. But we have to have this confidence, and this is what should come from the Buddhist approach. We have to have this confidence that it's not set in stone and that there are things we can do about it. That's all. And then have the humility and patience to work on it, because everything's dependent arising. Everything's dependent arising. Everything impacts upon everything else. This is just exactly the same way of saying, all my friends in prison, of course I'm unhappy. I'm in a shitty old prison. Yeah, it is an external reason. But guess what? You can learn to be happy in spite of the prison. You can learn to change your mind. This is the point. It doesn't mean we haven't got bad chemicals. It doesn't mean that the husband isn't awful. It doesn't mean those things. We're too absolute. We think it's either or. No, it just means developing confidence that I can change my mind. Doesn't mean it's easy, but that's the point. It's the whole job. That's the point. It's the whole job, that's the job, to change our mind. So we're going to change our mind. We better know it. Good Lord, not the book. Well, we're not discussing Jung's view. We're not discussing the neuroscientist view. You can do that. I'm not complaining. We're discussing Buddha's view, We have to know the mind. We have to know our mind. I mean, that's easy words to say, but as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, I remember reading his commentary on Mahamudra while I was working on Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra. It's easy to talk about the mind intellectually, say what it is, what it's not, how it functions, and the literature in Buddhism is really extensive. It's so fascinating. But to know your mind directly, wow, that's sophisticated, because you can't taste it, touch it, smell it, see it, or hear it. It is not physical. So you can't narrow, it's hard to pin it down, But we've got to start somewhere. We've got to start somewhere. And that's why hearing, like in Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra book, this wonderful way they talk in that particular way of describing meditation on the mind, the way the mind is a very delicious, very important thing to know, is that what the mind is in its nature, what its potential is, what its function is, what its character is, what it is in its bones, and this is why it's marvelous and encouraging to hear that our mind is naturally pure and clear. Now, that's not how a neuroscientist would talk, because they're referring to a thing called a brain, and a brain ain't pure and clear. Look at it in the butcher shop. It's revolting if you don't like brains to eat. We used to eat brains when I lived in Murrumbina when we were very poor as children. And tripe. Do people still eat tripe? It's cow's tummy, isn't it? I tried, it is, isn't it? I tried a lung one time and I vomited for 3 days. It wasn't a very pleasant experience. Anyway, never mind. So what was I saying? I forgot my point. I raved on. What was I saying before I said about
Brains are ugly. Brains aren't clear.
Oh, brain. That's right. The brain ain't pure and clear. So we got to see what Buddha's talking about. I'm wondering why I'm Google. I used Google once to go into Courtin Hospice in Brisbane. Now I'm stuck with Google forever. I don't want Google before my name. How do I
Put
get
you
rid
at the top of the list, though, for some reason.
Eh?
It put you at the top of the list, though. I like that.
Oh,
It's easy to find you.
I don't know. I had to go into Google on a Courtin Hospice in Brisbane last week. I had to use it via Google. Now I'm stuck with Google forever. I don't want Google in my name. My name is not Google.
We'll work on that after this.
Okay. So anyway, the mind is clear and pure. And what does that mean? It's so delicious to hear this. Another way is to describe how the way the mind functions, like Lamrim, he says, and this is really powerful. This is really an insight, gives us an insight into how our mind works and how our mind cognizes things. So as Lamrim, he says, I'll talk about the pure business in a minute, but the mind functions like a mirror. This is so extremely insightful. When we get this, we can see the way Buddha says how our mind functions and how we therefore make mistakes. So the mind is like a mirror. So it's obvious. It reflects everything, which is so peculiar because we don't experience it like that. Our mind merely reflects what's there. As Lama Zopa says, what's out there, how whatever is out there appears back to us. This is the way they say it. How whatever is out there appears back to us. In other words, how it's reflected in our mirror, which is our mind, is in terms of what's in the mind. It's so clear. If your mirror, Lama used a simple example. If your mirror's dirty or your mirror's cracked, it's obvious. Whatever is reflected in it will look crooked. It's such a simple analogy. And when we can hear this, it gives us a great insight into Buddha's view of how the mind functions. So what Buddha's saying is, and this is where we have to understand the contents of our mind, he divides all of our millions of thoughts and feelings and emotions into two categories, three actually, the third category being the mechanics. I like to call them mechanics, like concentration, good memory, many of these that are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So we'll put those aside. But the stuff that we have to learn to become familiar with, intimately familiar with, which is the job of being a Buddhist, be your own therapist, is the neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, disturbing, dirty ones, if you like, the ones that don't feel negative, don't get depressed, don't get kind of self-hate. The ones that distort reality, they're called the delusions, the afflictions, the mental illnesses, or the 21 synonyms that Lama Yeshe made up just to get us to understand them. They're neurotic, disturbing, delusional, misconceptions. These are states of mind that are the source of all suffering. Very simple for the Buddha. They're the source of all suffering, because they are misconceptions. Because when we see the world through the mirror, or the lenses, if you like, whatever, the mirror of anger, the mirror of attachment, the mirror of anxiety, the mirror of all the other 84,000, then whatever is out there will appear in that aspect. That's how they put it. Whatever's out there appears back to us in the aspect of what's in our mind. This is such a precise point. And we see this clearly. If I am angry with you, observe how you appear to me. Really ugly. I can't even bear to look at you. I can't stand the sound of your voice. If I write words about you, it's really evident. Anybody with half a brain reading those words can see that I have a very ugly picture of you. I write a picture of you that's ugly. Now, if you're attached to that person and you read my description, I promise you, of course, you won't see your description. You won't even recognize that I'm talking about the person you see, because your mirror is over-exaggerating the delicious parts of the person. My mirror is over-exaggerating their ugliness. It's so clear when we analyze it like this, and we can see that we do it, but because it's so instinctive, and why is it instinctive? It's because we've done it before. We've perfected anger, we've perfected attachment, and then because this is the point, those delusions in our mind cause that person to look ugly to me. It's so clear. We can see this happens, but because it's so instinctive and because our analysis is mistaken, it even appears to us like as if ugliness is coursing in your veins along with your blood. And I will never for 1 second think that I'm having a viewpoint about you, an angry viewpoint. This is the analysis the Buddha uses. It's very, very sobering, you know. So so the mind is like a mirror, and whatever's in the mind reflects, everything is reflected in that aspect of our mind. It's so delicious to hear that, you know. So that's why the key to being a Buddhist is to learn to not believe. As Lama Zopa says, one of the first practices is to stop believing in our viewpoints. That anger, that annoyance, that irritation, that jealousy, that panic, that anxiety, that attachment, that jealousy, whatever the name is that refers to a state of mind that's not a valid state of mind. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to feel angry or not feel angry. That's not the point by valid. Valid means a valid cognition in Buddhism. Well, in anybody's language, a valid cognition is a thought that's in sync with something that's real. This is the part that's difficult, because you might have cheated on me, so that's real. But what we can't see, we can't tell the difference between my anger and your bad action. We can't see the difference. If I'm sick and food looks disgusting to me. I remember when I had hepatitis in India, just food, even the thought of food was disgusting. The sight of food was disgusting. The smell of food was disgusting because of the bile in my system, you know. So I knew it was because of bile, but I didn't care. The food just looked disgusting. So that's how the world is. So if anger's in your mind, the person will look disgusting. And what we say is, I am angry because I got COVID-19 from my neighbor who punched me in the nose and I got his disease and it went inside me. So we blame the neighbor. So I'm angry with the neighbor. So when I think of the neighbor, I've painted what anger has done. What anger does is paint an ugly picture of the person. What attachment does is paint a delicious picture of the person, or the mirror is that picture. You know, that's how our mind works. I think we can understand this analysis. It's really powerful, you know. But this is why it's so hard, is because these habits, we're deeply addicted to them. We came into this life, the first second of conception, completely programmed with whatever habits we are now discovering in our life as we got older, you know. We're all just different recipes of the same, different recipes of the same diseases. Some got more anger, some less anger, some more depression, some less this, just different, you know, packages, that's all. So understanding our mind is the key. And most of us, we just don't study enough. We don't study Buddhist psychology enough, you know. How often, oh, he's gone, never mind. So, yeah, there he is. So, Ray, Geshe-la's taught Lorig a few times, I bet, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been through one time, yep.
One time ever, in 20 years.
Spent a long time on one subject, but he has covered it before, yes.
And you've got all the tapes, so you can have your wonderful classes at 10 in the morning using your videotapes that you can facilitate the class of, and people can study it all.
Study Lorig, that would be fantastic.
How marvelous. Do it. I hope do you video, Geshe-la?
We have started, yeah.
Thank God. We'll join the 21st century. How fantastic. All those teachers and years wasted. But his videos, I mean, they're classes in themselves, you know. So anyway, you can also have people teach it short, can't you? You have to wait to do it over 5 years.
That's right, yeah.
So understand, see, this is the thing, when you study Lorig, I remember when I first studied it, I found it exciting intellectually.
Sorry to cut you off, Venerable. Do you mind explaining what Lorig is to some people? Mind and practice, is that correct?
What? Sorry.
Just can we explain what Lorig is to some people that might not know what the term?
Yeah, I'm about to do that. I'm about to discuss.
Sorry.
Also, listen, it's a whole hour already nearly. Do you want to have a break first? I mean, or you want to have questions? I'm raving on here. I was going to get into a certain topic, but never mind. Do you want to have a break or ask questions?
Do you want a break?
Have questions first, then a break. No, I don't need a break, but you know. You might.
Okay. That went really quick. I'm hanging on you every word.
Okay, so I have some questions now before we go on. I'm going to go into the more depth about the mind, okay? and tell you why it's more pure, why it's pure in its nature, what Buddhism means by that. And we'll go into some of the states of mind and what low rig is and how it's hard to put into practice. So some questions first, I think. It's a good idea. Anybody? Any questions in the link in the chat there?
No questions in the chat.
Well, I'm happy to keep talking, but it's up to you.
Has anyone got any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat and I'll ask for you.
No questions? Oh, there's Afisha. She must be in Perth. Hello, Afisha. Happy to see you, darling. At least your name. And there's Dana. Okay, I'll keep talking. Never mind. If you have a question, you can butt in. Okay. So the mind is pure. This is something that's encouraging, is what I'm trying to say. You know, you might not read this too much if you do study this low rig. Low rig, this mind and awareness is the text that's used in the monasteries. That's coming way back since the Hindus before. It's a presentation of the two things: the presentation of the way the mind functions, the epistemological model of the mind, which is so fascinating. I swear it's mind-bogglingly fascinating. And then the psychological model, which is what we're discussing here, the contents of our mind. So, okay, but the mind is pure is very encouraging. And what this means is, this is why Buddha says we've all got Buddha nature. What that means is this. It's another way of saying our mind is pure. What that means is this. What that means is this. This is the Mahayana view. That by definition, every mind, and the Buddha would say there are countless upon countless trillions of beginningless and endless mind streams in the universe, never less and never more, because they're beginningless and endless. And all minds of those who are called mind possessors, that lovely word in Tibetan, sem chen, a mind possessor, a sentient being, the term we use is sentient being. I think mind possessor is great. That's the term, sem chen, mind possessor. We translate it sentient being. All mind possessors, by definition of being a mind possessor, possess the potential to be a Buddha. And what Buddha means is, Bud implies rid of all the rubbish, all the delusions. They're adventitious. They're not at the core of our being. They're not integral to who we are. They're not at the core of our being. This is the fundamental, outrageous finding of the Buddha. Outrageous, you know. And second, da implies the development to perfection of all the other stuff, love, compassion, and wisdom. This is what Buddha's found to be true. This is the Buddha's point. This is unique to the Buddha, with respect. Unique to the Buddha. And of course, from the point of view of neuroscience, it's an insanely demented, meaningless statement. You know, there's no view of course, there's no view in modern science. There can't be, because the brain is this physical thing that in its nature, you can find evidence of anger and depression and jealousy and love and compassion and intelligence in all brains. And so we give it, for us, it's a given that all of those states of mind, we give them equal status. And they're all a reasonable part of a reasonable person. Some people will be more psychotic, some less. Some will be more loving, some less. But to have such a view that a brain can be rid completely of all anger in all the rubbish is demented. We tried that in the 1930s by doing lobotomies. It didn't work, you know. So we're not discussing the brain here. This is why this view is utterly Buddhist, not the modern sciences. It can't be. That the Buddha has found this person who is not a creator, who didn't make this up. It wasn't revelation. He observed it with his own ingenious mind, that his mind, and therefore it deduces all minds, are in their nature capable of removing the delusions. And why would you do that? Because they are the cause of suffering. And what's the logic for how you can do that? Why it's possible to do that? And this is not evident to us initially, is because they are misconceptions, because they're not valid cognitions. A valid cognition is something that's in sync with reality. We're just talking even conventional reality here. But an invalid cognition is something that is a misconception. So simple example, 1 + 1, we have come to the conclusion in conventional reality that 1 + 1 is 2. So an invalid cognition is 1 + 1 is 3. So Buddha says attachment is an invalid cognition. It's a misconception. It causes us to see deliciousness in a cake that doesn't exist there. Anger is a misconception because it causes me to see in Fred ugliness that isn't there. So it's a misconception. And all misconceptions, because they're misconceptions, can be removed, because, and what causes them to be removed is the recognition of reality, of validity, of having a valid cognition. This is not easy to say, because when we hear that anger is not a valid cognition, it sounds like a joke. We just think of it as a raging, roaring, painful emotion. To hear that depression is an invalid cognition seems cruel and unfair. We think of it as a disease caused by a lack of an imbalance of chemicals, you know. They're states of mind, and they are the source of suffering because they're not valid, because they have no valid object. They have no valid object. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there that can be referred to. It's a misconception. That's what a misconception means. There's no such thing as 1 + 1 is 3. There's no such thing as an object that will make you happy, that is existing in the way that it appears to us as delicious. It's a misconception. This is the point that Buddha's making. It's an outrageous, fascinating idea. And because they're misconceptions, they can be removed from the mind. And that's what Buddha's found. And what's the result of removing them from your mind? Your happiness, baby. It's the source of your happiness. It's the method to get happy. How to get happy is you remove the delusions. That's it. You find your own happiness then. And that happiness can't change into suffering. We have happiness now. We do have happiness. And it's triggered by eating the cake. We do have happiness. It's triggered by contact with Fred. No argument. We do have unhappiness. It's triggered by eating the wrong cake. We do have unhappiness. It's triggered by meeting Fred's punch in the nose. No argument. But they're not the main cause. And the happiness we get is still happiness, but it's polluted, Buddha says, because it's driven by the junkie mind of attachment, you know. What Buddha said, this is the other point, what Buddha's saying happiness is, it's a technical term for a pleasant feeling. We only have 3 kinds of feelings in the way Buddha uses this word, not in the way we think of it as an emotion. There's either a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. Well, let's forget about the neutral. Who cares about them? We're concerned about the pleasant ones and the unpleasant ones. This is such a simple analysis, and it's quite shocking. In one day, if you had real intimate knowledge of your mind, you could do a little graph. Happy, 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 unhappy, unhappy, very unhappy, very unhappy, happy, 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 extremely happy, blissfully happy, ecstatically happy, 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 mild happy, unhappy, unhappy, extremely unhappy. You'd have this constant graph of your internal feelings from pleasant to unpleasant. That's it. There'll be a few neutral moments. Don't worry about them. So then, of course, another word for pleasant feeling is happiness. Another word for unpleasant feeling is suffering. Suffering is not in the cake. Happiness is not in Fred. This is where, because we're so addicted to the external world, we're so addicted to the external world being the cause of the happy feelings and the unhappy feelings, that we conflate the happy feeling with the cake. We conflate the unhappy feeling with the ugly event. If you say, oh, you know, how are you today, Robina? Oh, I'm so happy. Wow, tell me about it. I won't tell you about my happiness. I'll tell you about the cake, the weather, the lovely words that Fred said, because we are so believing that happiness is like coming from the outside. It's just a misconception. It's a complete misconception. That's a huge misconception. Happiness is a state of mind, and it triggers also feelings in the body. No question. It's the mind, though. So pleasant feelings and unpleasant feelings. So Buddha's view, his essence, the essential methodology, the essential technique for the Buddha for how to get happy is to practice virtuous thoughts. It sounds so peculiar. It sounds kind of boring, you know. Oh, I'd rather have the cake. A virtuous thought leaves a seed in the mind. This is karma now. Every virtuous thought, which then triggers an action of virtue by the body or the speech, leaves a seed in the mind. And that seed will ripen in the future as a moment of pleasant feelings. So every millisecond of your pleasant feelings in this life, just today, the last hour, if you had enough awareness, every second what you'd call pleasant feeling, each one of those moments is the fruit of a previous virtuous thought. That's it. That's it. Every moment that's called suffering is the fruit of a previous non-virtuous thought, which then triggered a negative action of body and speech. It's really technical. So as many moments of pleasant thoughts you have is as many fruits of past virtuous thoughts that are now ripening. And as many moments of unpleasant feelings you have is as many fruits of previous non-virtuous thoughts. It's quite technical. And this is the tragedy. I always use the example of that fisherman, that boy. It was a boy who was a fisherman. There he is, due to past karma. He's born as a human being, due to non-killing karma. He gets the fully ripened result of non-killing in this life. He gets a human mummy. 2, the second way karma ripens, he's got a tendency to kill from other habits of past, other lives of killing. So the tendency is in his mind. But this doesn't trigger until he meets the scenario called fishing. So what happens is, there he is, he meets the fishing when he's a little boy, and that triggers the memory of past killing. That's why he's got the tendency to kill, because he's killed before. So he doesn't know it's there until he meets the fishing. The fishing comes, it's like the catalyst. He sees the fishing, instantaneously it triggers, because of the past memory of it. He doesn't know it's a memory. The past habit, it's triggered like a memory, and instantaneously it triggers incredibly delicious feelings. The stronger the habit from past life of killing, the more powerful the pleasant feeling that will be triggered this millisecond he meets the fishing. And this next millisecond, attachment kicks in and then paints a divine, delicious picture of it and makes fishing look beautiful. So the logical deduction is, wow, fishing makes me happy. So he wants to keep fishing. Fishing doesn't make him happy. It's the virtuous karmic in his mind that is now triggered as a pleasant feeling. But the terrible tragedy is, it's the familiarity with fishing and that is what triggers, don't ask me how or why, the pleasant feeling in his mind, because of the habit of contact with that object. The stronger the object, the stronger the habit to do that action, the stronger the habit to eat that food, the stronger the habit to torture that person, the stronger the habit to jump on little girls when they're, sexually, the stronger the habit to fish, the more delicious it is when you see it and do it. And it all happens in a millisecond. So of course we can be forgiven for thinking that fishing causes happiness, that cake causes happiness, that torture causes happiness, because the contact with it triggers a pleasant feeling. It seems so ironic and so tragic. So we assume the cake is the cause of happiness. Of course we do. And that's what samsara is. So every time we eat the cake, believing it's the result, it's the cause of happiness, we're following attachment, so we're creating more suffering. So this is the terrible irony of samsara. It's completely mistaken. We have a completely mistaken analysis. That's the tragedy. So that's why it's so hard to change. I mean, forget about torture. Who wants to torture or rape? Nobody, none of us. We just want to eat cake, And look how hard it is to resist us eating a piece of cake. God in heaven, because of the habit. And that's the thing, the more the pleasure, the stronger the habit from the past. That's the tragedy of doing negative actions that harm others. Because it looks like, you might even know intellectually, the torturer knows that the person's not happy when they're screaming in agony as you torture them, but you can't stop because the habit's so strong, This is why attachment runs the show. This is why attachment is so insidious. Attachment is like a honey-covered razor blade. We haven't got the right analysis. That's the problem. So for us, happy feelings are what we get when we get what attachment wants. Buddha says, no, you got it wrong, babes. Happy feelings, finally, are what we end up with when we've given up attachment. That's what practice is, and that's why it's so hard. So there's different things. Karma is one thing, and then the mind, the way it works. But they're so integrated, you can't really separate them. You have to learn them. They're different technologies. And that's why you can only go so far in understanding the Buddhist view of the mind without understanding karma. You can only go so far without karma. The whole of Buddhism would collapse actually into a heap of absurdity without karma as the basis, as the explanation of everything. It's like Buddha's theory of everything, karma. It's incredible. Some questions, please. I'd like some questions. I've talked for a whole hour. No questions.
I'll ask one, Venerable. So we can't just remove the attachment by isolating ourselves from the object of attachment. We'll still have the attachment, won't we?
That's a really good point. This is a really good point. We can see, we have to know our minds well enough to know how deep the habits are. It's clear, you know, if you're, I mean, anybody with half a brain would never recommend to an alcoholic that you should give up attachment to alcohol while continuing to drink alcohol. That would be cruel and bizarre, and we know virtually impossible because of the depth of the habit. So, you know, it's clear that's only the first step, but it's an amazingly powerful first step. And that's why at the first level of practice is the first level of practice, which is abiding by the laws of karma, which is understanding the power of the object and the power of habit, that we then begin to harness the energy of the body and speech. And that means removing yourself from the difficult situations. We all know that. You can have, many people have a relationship with somebody, they say, oh, we fight so much, even though we love each other, it's best we're not together. Many people say that. That's intelligent to separate each other. I mean, that's when I always joke and say there'd be 40% more women on the planet. 40% of women who get murdered on this planet, you know who murders them? The person in the same bed. It's not against men. It's showing the power of the external object. So the very first level of practice in Buddhism is recognizing the power of habit, recognizing how we are addicted to those objects, whether it's to harm them or to eat them, one or the other, whichever it is, attachment or anger. But just be intelligent. So you harness your own physical energy. You harness your body and speech. You live in vows of not killing, not stealing, not lying. And you know it's necessary in some situations to remove yourself from the object altogether. Then it's massive. And that's why the ideal scenario for real practice of the wisdom wing is to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, become a monk or nun, live in intensive vows of morality. And as Lama Zopa says, we can't get ahead of the game without living in vows. There's something incredibly powerful about living in vows, such that every millisecond you're living in the vows, you're ticking over the virtuous karma of not killing, not stealing, not lying, etc., all the time. It's super powerful. Just being good is not enough, Lama Zopa says. So living in vows and giving up sex, drugs, and rock and roll is the quickest method because of the power of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, because of the power of food and having husbands and houses and comfort. I mean, it sounds intense, but it's the quickest way to get liberation. It's obvious. The quickest way is give it up. Yeah, go to the mountains, get Singapore to concentration, and you'll whiz to liberation very quickly. It's clear. And 99% of us won't do that. And of course, when you get to the bodhisattva path, you're different. You know, you can handle the rubbish when you're in the bodhisattva path. You at that level, you're okay. Nothing will disturb you. You know. So that's why we've got to know our own mind. That's why we've got to know our own mind to know what is it that triggers our rubbish. And some people remove themselves from some people because that's being intelligent. It's just being intelligent. If you can't handle one person, if it's too much for you, remove yourself from them. Don't blame them. No, it's your own mind. You're not capable. Don't blame the person. It's intelligent. It's not running away. It's intelligent, you know. You have to know where you're at, know what things you have to avoid, and then you really give your mind a chance, you know. You've got to know yourself really well. Does that make sense, Rain?
It does, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, people? Oh, we have a 5-minute break. 5-minute break. I'll be back in 8 until 13. I'll be back at 7:15, 7 minutes, okay?
Wonderful.
Give you a break and maybe speak of some questions. See you in a minute.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for me regarding Zoom or what's going on here? No. Wonderful.
Quick question for Venerable Robina. Should I just type it into the chat while we're...
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, do that. You can type it just to me if you like, not to everyone.
Okay. So chat.
Yeah, and then on the bottom right, it'll say to, and if you just click on the little down arrow, you can select my name. Vajrayana Institute, I think I'm under.
Okay.
My name's actually Rain, for anyone that doesn't know me.
Thank you, Rain. I'll do that now. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm here. I'm back, Rain.
Welcome back.
Are we all here?
There-
Okay. Any questions?
We've got a few new people. Yes, I did get one question from.
Oh, I'm not talking. Hang on.
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm here.
A
Any
question from one of our students. Could we
Yeah.
approach the negative habits that we would like to work on in a similar manner to the way we may approach an addiction such as alcohol?
That's the total of the question?
Could we approach the habits that we would like to work on in a similar manner to the way we might approach a physical addiction, for instance, an alcohol addiction?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And also technically, the Buddha would call an addiction not physical, it's a mental thing. And interesting, the word addiction, and this is where it really takes us time to get the understanding of what Buddha's meaning by these words. Addiction in Buddhism is just extreme attachment, that's all. Whereas you see in our world, in our culture, first of all, in our culture, when we say attachment, it's not really a word we use. We might even use it as something good. Oh, she's very attached to her family, we'll say. We don't, unless you're a Buddhist, you don't use attachment as a word for a problem. So it's very hard for us to hear it properly. So then, and when we do hear it, like, oh, I'm really attached to food, I'm really attached to my boyfriend, we then think, well, it's kind of normal. What do you mean that's a problem? So it's very hard for us to hear it. And then it seems rather cruel to think we've got a problem because the whole world is like this. But the best way to put it, and I'm not being sarcastic, that Buddha's basically saying we're all junkies, we're all addicts. It's a question of the object and a question of degree. And that's the correct, technical correct statement. It's a question of the object and it's a question of degree. So basically, Buddha's saying we've all got mental illness of some description, and it's called attachment. But because most of the attachment that most of us have to comfort, to pleasant things happening, to people being kind to us, to having a lovely house, to having a boyfriend, it seems cruel and unfair to call that a problem, But that's what we have to understand. Try to understand what Buddha means by this, by looking carefully, first to his definition, and then looking into our own mind. So yes, the answer is absolutely. So, we can see it's very clear. If you're really addicted to food, you're going to have lots of mental suffering. Some people can eat lots and not get fat. Many people get hugely fat and can get obese and die. Some people have incredible allergies. So, it is a physical component. There's a physical component there. But what makes it so hard for us to not eat that food, even though it has dire consequences, is because of attachment. It's attachment. Whether it's alcohol or eating too much food or wanting to be liked, something that seemed benign, it's all called attachment. So yes, approaching it in the same way. We have to be so conscious of our own mind, so aware of where we're at, what we need and what we don't need, And then we have to be cautious. And this itself demands a lot of practice, and it's not easy. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Thank you.
Who asked that question? Teresa?
Yeah.
Oh, good, darling. Makes sense, the answer?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a big job.
Good, darling. Good, sweetheart.
I have another one come in. I'll send it to you as I read it.
Yeah, good.
Would you speak to the distinctions of non-attachment and nihilism?
Yeah, well, that's a really good, interesting question, because I think when we hear about attachment and then we hear of non-attachment or we hear of detachment, we can't help but hear not caring. And that, certainly it comes to people, that becomes really cruel, and that is like nihilism. So it's a real misunderstanding. So I think if you think of, in terms of, say, cake, you're attached to cake, which means you've got this. So let's look at what attachment is first. Let's analyze it. It's multifaceted. We only notice it when it's really kind of at a gross level, but underneath it's much more subtle. The most primordial level of attachment is this constant feeling of not having enough, of dissatisfaction. This is the main, Lama Zopa says, this is the main disease in the West. It's the deepest manifestation of the disease called attachment. In other words, from practicing attachment in past lives, we come born into this life programmed with this deep feeling, and we can see in some people it's a lot worse than others, of just whatever I have, whatever I achieve, whatever I do, the default assumption is it's not enough. And we can see some people are completely miserable with this, no matter how many times their husband tells them they love them, no matter how much weight they lose, no matter how much they achieve, no matter how much they get, it's all, the default assumption is never enough. How we talk about the glass half full, that's dissatisfaction. And it's so spontaneous and automatic that we don't even notice it. We just think it's a normal thing. This is the symptom of the deepest level of attachment. So the next level of attachment is naturally because you feel you don't have enough, you haven't got enough, you haven't achieved enough, then it brings this emotional hunger, this yearning, this craving for something that seems to be missing. And that depends on your karma, whether it's food, torturing people, killing fish, money, your body, you name it. Attachment is limitless in its capacity to find a thing that will make it look more delicious than it really is. And this is the next level of attachment. When we found that thread or that object or that fishing or that cake or whatever it might be, then what attachment then does is make the object look way more delicious than it really is. That's the killer. And then, of course, we believe 100,000,000% that when I get that cake, that thread, that torture, that fishing, when I get it, it will trigger the happy feelings that I'm desperate to get, which will be, giving me satisfaction, giving me happiness. That's the logic of attachment. And it's in a millisecond, every second of the day it's functioning. And that's the gross level of it. That's the gross level of attachment. But it works at a much subtler level. It's there every day at the level of assumption. So the deepest, simplest, most pervasive way to describe attachment is that it's at a level of assumption. And it's this frantic assumption every second that it must get what it wants, that I must get what I want. And what I want is whatever what attachment wants is the nice things. And the nice things are specific to me, aren't they? We know very well, I'm living with Fred, and he prefers carrot cake. I prefer chocolate cake. So his attachment constantly wants carrot cake. I want chocolate cake. And the more strong my attachment and the more strong his attachment, the more we crash. So attachment is this junkie that wants what I want every millisecond. It is by definition totally self-centered. Of course, it sounds brutal to hear this, but this is the point. And it runs us. It's like a motor that's there all day, just driving us. And it seems cruel to say this because it seems like normal daily life. Of course, I feel I want to be comfortable. Of course, I want to have a nice taste. It seems bizarre to think it's a problem. But this is how subtle Buddha goes with it. And of course, we can only attack at one level at a time. At least we stop the heaviest level. That's why the very first level Buddha says is at least don't harm sentient beings. At least don't kill, steal, jump on the wrong partner, lie, etc. And why would you do those things? Because attachment is a junkie that wants what it wants and will do anything to get what it wants. So attachment's heavy duty, And then so when it doesn't get what it wants, which is guaranteed 1,000 times a day, what's that called? That's called aversion. And that's multifaceted as well. The most volatile level of aversion is called anger. Shout and yell and kick when you don't get what you want. It's obvious. The mild aversions, and this is for you depressed people, is irritated, annoyed, upset, frustrated, or depression. It's much more subtle. And the fact is attachment's not getting what it wants 1,000 times a day. And we have this, and so the meeting point between attachment wanting what it wants and not getting it, that's the beginning of aversion. So if you're a mild kind of person who doesn't shout and yell, you're the person who gets depressed. 1,000 times a day, your attachment, your neediness to get nice things will be thwarted, but you won't even notice it because it's too mild. And those moments build up. There's nothing that we experience. This is something that's very fascinating. We tend to think that things go in one ear and out the other. But, there's not a single millisecond. As Lama Zopa says, every millisecond of the day, it's like we are storing memories in our mind. We're like taking photos all day and storing the images in our mind. Nothing goes astray. We might not be able to access it at a gross level because we're not capable, but nothing goes astray. Nothing doesn't go into our mind. So by the end of the day, you've had 1,000 moments of thwarted attachment, but very subtle, and you haven't noticed. What do you think? There'll be one moment, it'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and one morning you won't get out of bed because it's built up over days and weeks and months and years. Or the anger, you'll kill yourself or your husband. It builds up. Everything builds up, So we're really brilliant practitioners, and this is advanced. With single point of concentration, we would be noticing every millisecond of our thoughts. We'd be in complete control of this seeming chaos in here. We just think it's normal in our culture. We don't have any equivalent in modern psychology or neuroscience of what Buddhism has had for 2,500 years, which was made up by these genius Indians before them. This brilliant, genius psychological skill called single-pointed concentration that gives you this incredibly sophisticated ability to completely harness to a brilliant degree every tiny thought. You can't even conceive of this. Lamrim actually talks about it so beautifully in Mahamudra. We haven't no equivalent in modern psychology. It's unbelievable what our mind is capable of, you know. And when we see what we're capable of, and we see where we're at now with our chaotic minds, it's a miracle that we're not all killing ourselves and each other every day. I find it's astonishing. We're not. Because our minds are chaos, and we think it's normal to have chaos. It's very fascinating. So attachment is this junkie that drives, it's like a motor that drives us every second, and it wants only the nice things. And then when it doesn't get it, that's aversion. And then it depends on, it's either anger, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, or depression. There's a spectrum. And these are the two. And then all the other 84,000 are branches of these. It's like hilarious, you know. So there's an incredibly sophisticated model of the mind. And to begin to comprehend it, first intellectually, then theoretically, and then experientially, is the job of being a Buddhist. Any questions?
That's it for now, Venerable.
Oh, come on, you people. I've got to keep talking.
I just noticed our YouTube is slightly behind us, so the questions
right.
come in a second late, but
Okay, that was me talking to myself before, wasn't it?
I'm trying to keep them, I'm trying to move them across to our Zoom session, so.
Yeah, good, great. Because I mean, how many Zooms have you got? Up to 100 only?
100 only at this stage, yeah.
But you can make it more. I mean, we did 400 in Brazil. It was totally fine.
Really? No drama?
No drama at all. And that was in Brazil.
I thought it was choking before, so I apologize if I turn your camera off. It's only because I think it might stall or something. Not you.
I've done so many of these, I can't tell you. And it's just, sometimes it's a problem. I mean, for me, I'm 1 meter from my modem, and that's what, from my side, but I've found the numbers there's no impact on whether it works or not.
Right,
I was
okay. Good to know.
And in Colombia, even in Bogota, they had about a couple of hundred and it worked fine.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know.
This is Australia though, Venerable. Our internet's...
No, I don't know what it is.
I don't know.
Anyway,
They
whatever.
don't have our NBN.
That's right.
Anyway, any questions, you people? Any questions? Any questions? Any old question? I don't care. Any old question. Doesn't matter.
We come back to, we started on talking about low rig. It's something I hadn't heard before. Are we going to come back to that?
That's what I'm talking about now.
Okay, that's
Every
what
word I'm saying is the content of low rig. Every word I'm saying in today's session is the content of low rig. How the mind works. Exactly, darling. Exactly. So I'm trying to make it more tasty and experiential. I'm not giving it too theoretically, but I'm touching on the theory of it. But it's the presentation. The one part is the psychological model, which presents the different states of mind. I've mentioned like 3 or 4 here, and even if we understand these 3 or 4, this is profound. There are many. I mean, in this low rig text, they probably touch on 151 different states of mind, and it's very fascinating how they all work. But if we get the heart of it, the 3 root ones, ego grasping, which we haven't talked about, and attachment and aversion, these are the source of all the others. So once we get these clear and understand how they're misconceptions, understand how they're delusions, understand how they're thoughts, their concepts, and how they then affect our physical because we're so familiar with them, you know. So I'm just trying to talk a bit experientially about the way the mind works. This is what you learn in low rig. You learn the theories, and then like anything, you learn the theories of how to make a cake, but you got to practice it to get a taste, don't you? You can repeat the theory and it's so boring. You got to give it, you got to put meat on the bones of it from your own practice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So this is, I mean, yeah. This is where too, when we've heard that phrase, the 8 worldly dharmas, I know when I first heard it, I thought, what are these boring people talking about? 8 boring, worldly, boring dharmas, you know? So what is that? That's this cute phrase. I don't know who invented that, whether it's Tibetans or the Indians, I don't know. But all it is, and it's usually taught in the Mahayana path, and it's really, what it is a more subtle presentation of the pervasiveness of attachment. It's very fascinating. It's at a more fundamental level. At the very first level of practice, in junior school, the first scope of the Lamrim, where the Buddha gets us to live according to the vows of morality and don't kill and don't steal and don't lie, at least don't do the heaviest actions, which is harm others. And then we can kind of extrapolate from that. Well, that means I should try and control my cake eating and control my buying of clothing. You kind of try to harness the servants of your attachment and your anger. And the servants of your attachment and your anger are your body and your speech. It's sort of evident, you know. Excuse me, I just got to have a drink. So in the very first level of practice, you harness all that energy, you try to control your body and speech. You become a disciplined person with good ethics. So then and that's the start. Then you've got some space now to get into the mind itself and see what drives your body and what drives your speech, the delusions. So then at that level, you're harnessing the grosser levels of attachment. The main level of you trying to give up attachment here is attachment to the objects of the senses, which are the grossest ones. You try to harness the energy of your attachment to food, to sex, to possessions, external things. You try to have a good, humble, disciplined lifestyle. Who's the beneficiary? You. It's not Buddha being like a policeman, making you not be happy. It's the method to get happy. And that's the emphasis at that gross level. But at the Eightfold Dharmas, when you hear about this in the Mahayana path, and the framework is as a method to really help you see your mind at a subtler level, in the context of wanting to rip out the delusions so that you can cultivate compassion. So what drives you to see these eight worldly dharmas is your wish to benefit others. So these are more subtle ways, more pervasive ways that attachment functions. And we can really see when we present these eight, how they do pervade our life. So there's like 4 pairs, you know, we've all heard them. So they're basically, it's this constant hunger. Attachment's an emotional hunger, basically, on the assumption that I'm missing something. Why would you have hunger if you didn't feel you were missing something? So it's this emotional hunger attachment. So there's the first pair is this at the level of assumption, this assumption that happiness is when nice things happen. When basically it's attachment to comfort. It's attachment to feel, to happy feelings, So it's constantly there, this craving to get happy feelings. And then the millisecond an unhappy feeling comes, attachment shifts its emphasis, and now attachment is craving to be free of unhappy feelings. The attachment is constant. It's always either wanting happy feelings and, of course, doing everything it can to get them, which is to be in your comfort zone, to have the pleasant weather, I'm in this lovely little house in Santa Fe. It was built adobe, and it's been built very well. It's got very thick windows, so it's really cool in the summer. But as soon as it gets too hot, I switch on the AC, and the AC is perfect. It's quiet, it's delicious. And as soon as it gets too cold, I turn it off. I could do it 10 times a day. That's driven by my attachment to comfort. It's the most obvious one. And everybody is saying, well, that's mean of Buddha. You mean I've got to stay hot? I've got to be sweaty? No. But it's evident that everything we do, why I'm sitting in a chair, why do I move? Because my knee hurts. Why is that? Because attachment wants to be comfortable. I mean, it seems mean to point it out at such simple levels, but we're driven by this. We're driven by it. When you're hungry, I stand up, I go to the fridge. I'm tired, I lie down, I go to sleep. I'm itchy, I scratch. This is driven by attachment. Every millisecond, it's attachment that's a junkie for pleasant feelings. If I'm sit for too long and my leg hurts, look how agonizing it is, you know? You can't stand the pain. So in that example, attachment is always wanting the pleasant feeling in the body. The moment you're sitting in the teachings and you're trying to be polite because the Dalai Lama's teaching, you're in the front row and you don't want to be embarrassed by wriggling. So you live in this hell, don't you? Your attachment is craving to have pleasant feelings. And then gradually the pleasant feelings start. You feel all comfy. Oh, it's going to be great. I won't move today. And then sure enough, the unpleasant feelings gradually happen. Your legs get painful. So attachment has now shifted its emphasis and you're craving the stopping of the unpleasant feelings. And you'll do anything. And you say to yourself, no, I won't move. But you sure enough, you move. And you get stern looks from the Dalai Lama and you feel mortified. So this is an ordinary attachment to comfort, to pleasant feelings. That's one pair. Never stops. All day. That's how, and this is why we're so fortunate. I remember reading about a person who told me about when he was paralyzed from the neck down. If you don't think about it, you don't think about that. But he would itch. He couldn't do anything. He can't move his body to scratch himself. He can't move his body if he's sliding. He can't do anything. Can you imagine the nightmare? You can't fulfill attachment's craving every tiny baby second to get a pleasant feeling. That's the first pair. A craving to get pleasant feelings, and then craving to be free of unpleasant feelings. In other words, you can't win. The next one is craving to get things and craving to be free of not getting things. That depends on some people, whether more or less for some people, you know. The next two are really fascinating, and they seem very similar, but they're different. Craving to hear nice words with my name in them. And then craving to be free of hearing unnice words with my name in them. This is like living hell. The fourth one, the fourth lot, the fourth pair, these seem to be the subtlest, the most pervasive, and it seems similar to this third one. And it's called attachment to reputation. But this is the one that is the most pervasive, the most subtle, and the last to go, I think, before you realize emptiness. It's called attachment to reputation, which initially seems ridiculous. Oh, I don't care what people think of me. Rubbish. Every second this is driving everything we do since we are born. Because this is the point. It seems so abstract to talk this way, but this is how Lamrim points it out too. In the, because of ego grasping, the root delusion, the ignorance that believes in this intrinsic, separate, concrete, absolute, pointable, separate me. It seems so bizarre to think that thinking you're a separate me is a mistake, but that's the major mistake. When you've achieved Buddhahood, when you've removed all the delusions, there is no longer a sense of a separate me. It's as if your me is integrated with every other me of the universe. And that's the gross result of the ego, the consequence of ego grasping, the root delusion. As Lamrim says, when there is ego grasping, there is me and the other. So this is what drives everything of this me. There's this me, assumes another. So this one reputation. The irony of attachment is it's a symptom. Attachment is a symptom of a deeply disturbed, depressed, unhappy, nothing, worthless me. So since we're born, we're craving, even when mummy smiles at us when we're a baby, this hunger to be seen and heard just got its result. Mummy smiled at me. So I've already programmed, oh, that worked. I'll do it again tomorrow. I'll kick my leg the certain same way, expecting mummy to smile again. It's reasonable to want mummy to smile, but what we don't realize is we're driven by this hunger to be seen and heard and validated and approved by other people every single second of the day. This is the schizophrenic consequence of this is the schizophrenic disease of this attachment. They say it's the last attachment to go. They say the yogi in the mountains has given up attachment to everything, but he's still thinking of what the people in the village are thinking about him. And we don't, because this is so pervasive in our mind, when we're with people, we're walking in the street, we're in the shop, we're with our friends, with our husband, with our children, there's always this neediness to be seen and heard, and this sense of a self-consciousness. Whether it's arrogance or shy, it's the same. We're all the time observing these outside people, and we're all the time adjusting what we say and adjusting our behavior to get the right response. Why? Because we think we're nothing. And we need to be validated by other people to make us feel like we're something. That's this attachment. It's the deepest one of all, the most pervasive, the most pain. What do you think loneliness is? Think about it. We take it for granted. It is a terrible disease, the number of people who are lonely. This is not to diminish the suffering, but have a look at the analysis of it. Loneliness means I'm on my own, and all my thoughts, I've got all my thoughts, haven't I? All these thoughts. And what's your thoughts? All our thoughts are we're having conversations with people. So on the way home from work and you've got your hubby at home, the whole time in the car, you're talking to your husband about the things that have happened, and you burst through the door and out it all comes, We need other people to hear our thoughts because we don't have enough confidence that having my thoughts is enough. I've got to share them with somebody. That's what loneliness is. I've got no one to share my thoughts with. Why do you need to share your thoughts? Because your thoughts for you are worthless until someone else hears them. That's the depth of our suffering of attachment. This is attachment at the deepest level, you know, and there's every second. And so the one of hearing nice words. I mean, the moment we hear somebody criticize us, we go mad. The pain is so unbearable. So we've got to ask the question. In other words, why do we need to be liked? Don't think this means you're going to be some autistic kind of nihilistic person. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. To have love and friendship and have people who adore you and you adore them, this is called communication. That's called love. That's amazing. But we don't distinguish between the love and the attachment. We think they're the same. They're not. They're like chalk and cheese. And that's Buddha's super brilliant analysis, you know, which is not how we talk in our culture. We conflate attachment and love. It's fascinating. So attachment is the symptom of, I mean, yes, you would often call it schizophrenic. Don't be insulted by that. It's meaning this, you know, like this. In other words, with attachment, we're utterly disconnected from ourselves. We're obsessed with the outside. We are like, the more we have attachment, the more I am nothing. This is really the way to put it. The more I give the value to the cake, the people, the things, the sound, the smell, the taste, the money, the this, the that, the job, everything out there is powerful and I'm nothing. And we've got to ingest it all to become something. And it just means more suffering, more misery, more despair. So attachment is pretty pervasive. Lamrim, as you said, I can tell you about it for one whole year. We will never begin to understand it until we start to build something up here. So we can have all the theories we'll learn in low rig, and you don't hear all these words in low rig. What you hear in low rig, what is attachment? The definition is, it is a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the deliciousness of something. That's the theory. But look at the experience. That's what we've got to grow, you know. And slowly, slowly. I mean, you're not going to get rid of it until you realize emptiness. So don't hold your breath. We've got to see it at ever more subtle levels, catching it. Start with the first level, control your body and speech, live in vows, harness your body and speech, harness the servants of your attachment. Then you begin to see the attachment at the gross level and harness that. Then as you go to the compassion wing, you become more sophisticated in seeing your mind and the subtlety of these 8 worldly dharmas, you know, the pervasiveness of them. It's very fascinating. And this one of reputation, I mean, I don't know what they were talking. When I heard it, I thought, don't be stupid. I don't care what people think of me. Bullshit. Of course we do. Desperate every second. Hungry to be heard, to be seen. Because why? Because we don't exist otherwise. In other words, we're so demented that it's like we have to look in a mirror to say, oh, wow, I exist. When a person smiles at us, you go, wow, I must exist. A person just smiled at me. I must be real. I must be valuable. That's how desperate we are. That's the suffering of attachment. So low self-esteem is a function of attachment. I am nothing. It's just the grosser level of being nothing. It's attachment. I'm nothing. So we crave someone else. It's very fascinating. Super fascinating. Any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple come through.
Oh, I'm very happy. Come on then.
Can you please talk about the aspect of the mind being clear?
I'll go back to that one. Yeah, make us a little bit better. It's a bit exhausting, this attachment one. Yeah, okay, this is what gives us courage. Consciousness, you see, this is very hard to see, but consciousness, okay, when you learn the epistemological model of the mind, you learn that there are 2 ways the mind functions. Sensory consciousness, mental consciousness, okay? And mental consciousness, sensory is just the part of our mind that functions through the medium of the eye, the ear, the nose, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Question. Could you please, okay, whoever that is, all coming. So then sensory is actually, and I often talk about this, but it's really powerful to get this distinction. This is very sobering. Sensory consciousness is that part of our mind, which is not physical, remember, that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the tactile, the nerves, the skin, the ear, the drum, the bits and pieces, the tongue, the nose. So the nose doesn't smell. Nose consciousness in combination with the nose has the cognition of different smells. Eye consciousness in combination with the eyeball and the bits and pieces has a cognition of two things, shape and color. These senses are profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. But we give them, like Lamrim says, we make the body the boss. We give incredible power to the sensory consciousnesses that they simply don't have. So they lead us up garden paths. I mean, it's so obvious. I will say, Fred is so divine. And I believe my eyes are seeing divine Fred. Total nonsense. My eyes are seeing shape and color, and that is it. But because of everything stored in my mental consciousness, that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's where all the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and the unconscious and the subconscious, the entire spectrum of our inner being, this is what we have to become familiar with. This is where we have to become our own therapist. This is where the workshop is. And that's what happens. The eye conscious sees Fred, and in a millionth of a second, my mental conscious is triggered quicker than Google, I promise you. And up comes this story out of my mouth, which is a bunch of opinions. Oh, Fred is so divine. It's an opinion. So what's that? Now we've got the mental consciousness, and there's two ways it functions. We call it conceptual, and then there's one that's called perception. And this word has got a specific definition in Buddhist psychology, not the way we use it as a general way of cognizing something. Perception necessarily is more, in the mental context, is more subtle, is unmediated. So when you start to learn how conceptuality works, it's utterly, utterly fascinating, you know. It's completely made up nonsense. Conceptuality is just a bunch of thoughts in the mind, and they have to be mediated by mental images. So eye consciousness sees bare bones shape in millisecond because of my habit, my connection with Fred, the things he's done and said, and my opinions and all my flavors and my tastes. Out comes a series of conceptual stories. Fred is divine. He is the cause of all my happiness. He is this, he is that, whatever it might be. It's a bunch of opinions. So we function at this gross level of conceptuality throughout our life. Only when we've got single-pointed concentration and we have gone beyond the sensory and beyond the conceptuality, and we have no equivalent in modern science, modern neuroscience, modern psychology. When we've gone beyond, we've harnessed the energy, subdued the grosser level of our conceptuality and our sensory, we've now begun to access a subtler level of our mental consciousness. And that's where we now eventually will have a direct perception, a non-conceptual direct perception of something. And the best we can say is those words. We can't imagine it. It's beyond conceptual. And when you've finally got a direct non-conceptual insight into emptiness, that's when you cut the root of all the rubbish, you know. So perception is direct cognition, as much as that seems abstract to us. But we live at the level of conceptuality. So that's a big shock to us, because we think in our world, when we say conceptuality, we point up here and we think theories and concepts and intellectual blah and blah, blah. And then we point here and we go emotion, and we think they're two separate parts of us. No, they are all rooted in conceptuality. So 1 + 1 is 2 is a concept. You are ugly is a concept. That is a cup, is a concept. I want to make people happy is a concept. Love is a concept. The definition of love is under the heading the virtuous states of mind, as opposed to the neurotic ones. Love is a thought, starts with the thought, the concept, may you be happy. Love is a delight when you are happy. It's a bare bones thought. That's the start with it. So that's why we have to reprogram all of our conceptuality into be in sync with valid concepts. And then we put meat on the bones and grow them, all the virtuous ones, until they're spontaneous and eventually direct perceptions. So everything comes down to conceptuality. We live in a world of thoughts. including anger, psychosis, lust, rage, jealousy, intelligence, kindness, being good at music. They're all rooted in being concepts. All these negative and positive and neutral states of mind are all concepts by definition. So it's a very different type of analysis. So of course, to hear that anger is a concept sounds like a joke to us, because what we feel is a raging feeling in the body. And that's only because the angry thoughts have been so habitual that now they've exploded and affected your entire body. And that's why, if you understand the Tibetan medical system, which is the same system that used in the Vajrayana, it's a very helpful description. Don't have to use the one about the chemicals, which the West uses, but the Tibetan medical one, which is the Vajrayana one, is really very interesting. It really explains this, you know. You've got gross consciousness and gross body, the bag of bones here, and our sensory. Then we've got subtle consciousness, which is all our mental states. They're subtle. And they are conjoined with our subtle physical energy, which is the 72,000 subtle channels coursing through our entire body. And then coursing through those subtle channels is all these different pranas or wind energy. I mean, the Tibetan doctors study for 12, 13, 14 years, all these different winds, like the acupuncture people do. The different wind energies, prana, like the same from the Indian one. All these wind energies are coursing through all these channels, and every one of our states of mind, love, compassion, all of them, each has their own wind. So all of our winds and our minds are inextricably linked together. They say the mind rides on the winds. So, as Lama Zopa says, in the Kala Chakra Tantra, I find this so helpful. In the Kala Chakra Tantra, in the texts, there are these detailed descriptions of the intimate relationship between internal and external energy. So internal is mind, and external is the physical. And so the subtle physical is the winds. So the love and the winds energy are connected. The anger and its winds, the jealousy and its winds. So you go to your Tibetan doctor and she'll feel your pulses, and she will know exactly the imbalance of those wind energies is linked directly to your attachment, which is why you're having panic attacks. She'll discover those particular winds are impacted exactly by your anger. Now, as Lama Zopa says, everything you think, this is what karma is. Every millisecond of what we think, it first of all, it develops that habit in your mind, but it impacts upon those wind energies. So, you know, by being angry, you increase the habit to be angry, but you also pollute those wind energies, which eventually is what causes future sickness. And eventually, in turn, creates the cause for you to have a body. And in turn, eventually even impacts upon the external element, which is why you have the imbalance of the external elements. It's caused by the minds of every sentient being in the universe. So that's why you have environmental karma. Everything that the mind does impacts upon the physical, which in turn impacts upon the external physical. That's how the universe exists, you know. So the mind and the body are intimately connected. Now, because we are not aware of all the thoughts at a subtler level, we're only aware when they hit the body and the violent winds explode and you're going to kill somebody or yourself, or you're inert in bed from depression, because you don't notice until the body's involved, because we're so obsessed with our body. We think the body is everything. So we don't notice the mind until it hits the body. That's the wheels falling off. It's just too late. We've got to have concentration. We've got to observe our thoughts before they turn into violent emotions. The physical body is just the symptom. It's just the external symptom. That angry shouting is just the symptom of what's in the mind deeper down, which is the habit of angry thoughts, the training of angry thoughts, the training of attachment thoughts, the training in subtle angry thoughts, which turns into depression, you know. It's subtle, subtle, subtle. So anyway, that's one thing about the mind. Now, how does it mean the mind is clear and pure? First of all, there's the ultimate Buddha nature, as Lama talks about in Mahamudra. That because delusions are misconceptions, they're not valid cognitions, they're made up nonsense. So because they're made up nonsense that have no valid referent object, they can be removed. So listen to this. It's not a simple example. I'm learning math. 1 + 1 is 3. Robina, come on, you've learned that before. It's not, darling. It's 1 + 1 is 2. Oops, you're right, mummy. Now, 1 + 1 is 3 is a concept. 1 + 1 is 2 is a concept. But we, in our conventional world, and we're talking conventional reality here, I've agreed that 1 + 1 is 2. That sound, that concept, that sound, a sound coming out of my mouth represents a thought, and the sound is 1 + 1 = 2. That's a concept. We have agreed that that's a valid concept, and we can prove it in the way we discuss things. It's a conventional reality. So I'm learning my maths and I make a mistake. 1 + 1 is 3. I'm not holding on to it. I don't really believe it. I just made a mistake. You fix me. And what happens? Oh, you're right. 1 + 1 is 2. Now, this is the point. 1 + 1 is 2 is a concept. 1 + 1 is 3 is a concept. We have agreed 1 + 1 is 2 is the correct one. I hear what you tell me. I buy into it. I agree with you. And now I'm convinced of the truth. So what happened to the wrong concept? 1 + 1 is 3. It's disappeared into a puff of smoke. It doesn't exist. What made it go is the valid concept. And that's how you become a Buddha. When you finally remove from your mind the layers upon layers upon layers of misconceptions, the deepest one that believes in the intrinsic me, the attachment, which is the main voice of the belief in the intrinsic me that believes in delicious bread and delicious cake and all the other rubbish. And then the anger that believes in ugly bread and ugly cake. All the dramas we've made up and practiced to perfection for countless eons, the misconceptions, which we believe are true now, once we've removed them from the mind, and what removes them from the mind is the insight into the truth. So when you finally have seen the reality that there is no intrinsic me, and the seeing of that truth is what annihilates the belief in the intrinsic me, that's the first moment you realize emptiness. And that's the first moment you start climbing out of your samsara into your nirvana. You got more work to go, but it comes down to the mind and concepts. So we've got to be this genius cognitive therapists, unpacking and unraveling these millions of ridiculous, insane conceptual stories that have no basis in reality, and arguing with them. It's a super intelligent, super sophisticated, super detailed job. So, because misconceptions have no valid basis in reality, therefore they can be removed. That is the nature conventionally of our mind, that they have no place there. They're adventitious. They don't belong, and they can be removed. But virtues cannot be removed, because they are valid. Wisdom cannot be removed from the mind. So really, it's a simple way of putting it. I like the analogy of water. Pure water is in its nature pure. It's 2 bits of H and 1 bit of O. That's water in its nature. It can be so polluted you would die if you drank it. But we know the pollution is not intrinsic to the water. It can be removed. And the waterness is always there, no matter how much pollution is in that glass. H2O is always there. And that's the true nature of water. You just got to identify the pollution and remove it. It's a good analogy. But you can't remove water from water. So if you like, the H2O of mind is virtue and wisdom. That's it. The other stuff's the pollution. I find that analogy very helpful. But also, Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra that even the delusions are still in the nature of purity as well, because they're still mind, they're still thoughts. And that's when we've realized emptiness. Everything appears differently to us, Things aren't set in stone. So having confidence, which does not exist in neuroscience, with respect to us, it does not exist in our psychology, because we think we give equal status to all the shit and the goodness, and hope we'll have more goodness than the bad. But the Buddha says, no, he's more radical, get rid of the lot. So aiming for that is very encouraging. So I have to know our mind well, intimately, sophisticatedly, in levels to degrees of subtlety that we can't even conceptualize in modern psychology, with respect. It's brilliant, just brilliant what we're capable of. Should make us so happy. And then as we know this, when all the shitty stuff comes, the anger comes, the jealousy comes, and we don't buy into it so strongly, we know it's just there, it's old habit. It's like reverberations. Oh, shut up, you tell it to go away. You don't buy into it so strong. What makes it so crazy is this is the terrible irony of ego, It's not the anger that makes us so terrible. It's the anger with the anger. It's not the jealousy that makes us so unhappy. It's our anger with being jealous. It's not our depression that's so bad. It is, but we get angry about the depression. So we kind of add more rubbish on top of rubbish, you know. So we're going to have this courage when we start to know our minds to live with this stuff. It's old habits. They're there a long, long time. They're not going to go overnight. So you've got to, the next step is to lessen the power we give to them. But we want it all to go away. That's one of the absurd misconceptions about meditation, you know. We think it's relaxation. We think it's an alternative to a pill. We think it's to make the thoughts go away because we're desperate, because attachment can't stand the pain. You've got to learn to live with all this crappy stuff. Welcome all the rubbish roommates, but don't give them power. That's the big major step forward. Then we'll start to become sane. Because attachment can't stand to hear the rubbish, you know. Welcome it, bring it on, swim in it. As a friend of mine said, as a therapist or a Buddhist, you've got to have your hands in your own shit, you know. Be brave. But you've got to know the mind. You've got to know don't just be brave in the beginning. You've got to know the distinction. Buddha's got this unique approach. The rubbish ones and the good ones. You've got to distinguish between them. They're like chalk and cheese. That to us right now is a big soup of emotion. We can't tell the difference. That's the job we have to do. That's why you have to study the mind. So you get Rain to give you more courses on the mind, please. You start with the boring old theories. Then you put the meat on the bones by your own practice, you know. Knowing your mind's got this incredible potential. Make us so happy. And the more we know our potential, the more we don't mind the garbage. We're not scared of it. Most of our suffering is we're scared stiff of the rubbish, you know, because we're all trying to be good girls and good boys and want to be loved by everybody. So we're terrified of all that rubbish, you know. Be brave. Stop, you know, it's okay. Be brave. Got to be brave. Am I communicating or raving like a maniac?
Your passion's inspiring, Venerable.
What?
Your passion's inspiring.
Okay, good. Okay, it's time to go home. Look, 8 o'clock for me.
It is. The questions are flooding in now, but I'll keep
more.
One more? Are you sure we don't want to keep you up?
If you don't mind, I'm happy.
I'll fire this one at you. What about our desire for wisdom? How is this distinct from an attachment?
Exactly. First of all, the word an attachment is a mistake, to be very precise. Attachment is not an object. Attachment is a state of mind. So we've got virtuous states of mind, and which are valid, reasonable, appropriate, have a valid object, and we have to grow them. Then we have invalid states of mind, which are neurotic and ridiculous and have no basis in reality. So we're using the same word there: desire for liberation, desire for happiness, desire to help others. But let's distinguish. Attachment, if you recognize it, is a complete junkie. It's hungry. It's neurotic. It's I-based. It's the opposite to other. It's the opposite to virtue. It's a nightmare, and it distorts and exaggerates everything. But a wish, an aspiration to be enlightened, an aspiration to help people, that's a virtuous state of mind, but we have to see the difference. It's more to recognize the character. When we can see the character of the neurotic ones, they're deeply painful. And if it is attachment, let's say you're attached to your practice, and if it is the delusion of attachment, you've got some fantasy of being a Buddhist. You know, you're sitting there doing your meditation, being so self-conscious, so full of yourself, and you know, and someone's out there doing the dishes. Oh, be quiet, I'm trying to meditate. That's not meditation, that's not practice, that's just self-centered. So attachment in its nature is a neurotic, I-based, hungry, demented state of mind. The wish to be a better person, the wish to do this, the wish to help others, the wish to be even, you know, and that's where motivation comes, which we'll talk about tomorrow or something. So there's a huge difference between a neurotic state of mind and a virtuous one. We don't make that distinction in our culture. Hope that helps. What's the next question?
I have one more here. I'll send it to you. It's a bit longer.
Go on, just say it. Say it all out.
Are the comforts that we have access to not a result of our good karma and past virtuous actions? So why does it seem as if enjoying them is a deterrent from advancing on this path?
Very good question.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the irony. The irony is every tiny thing that we get that's nice, like a nice mouthful of food, a pleasant house, AC, you know, heating in the winter, delicious things. As exactly as you say, every tiny thing we get that is what we want, that is what attachment wants, is the fruit of virtue. But the point is this: that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and think it's ugly. So we have to distinguish, and that's where, again, the distinguish between attachment and enjoyment. Enjoyment is a word for pleasant feeling. So if we've really got the right mind, the moment you get that pleasant meal, You know it's due to your past virtue. You just work on, you do this automatically. You don't take it for granted. You rejoice that you created the cause of past generosity to even have a meal. You totally delight in it. And before you shove it in the mouth mindlessly by following attachment, you do a little practice, you offer it, you rejoice it, and you see it as empty, and you do it with bodhicitta. That's how then you use that moment of the fruit of your past virtue, and you create more virtue, so then you get the best of both worlds. But just to eat it up greedily is like you've got a garden full of veggies. You don't even remember that you planted them. You have this hubris of, oh, aren't I lucky? The universe is kind to me. And you greedily eat up all the veggies with no recognition that it's cause and effect. And before you know it, you've got no veggies left, and you've lost the plot. So it's knowing it's the fruit of your virtue. So that means what's what rejoicing means. We never rejoice. We take it for granted that we should get a good meal. We assume we deserve a good meal. If you've created the cause, yeah. So if you do get the good meal, the nice thing, the pleasant word, the lovely weather, whatever it is the fruit of your virtue. You recognize that, you see it as empty, you have it with, you use it and have it with bodhicitta. Then you keep showing more virtue. You get the best of both worlds. That's what practice is. Of course, if you're a yogi, like Geshe-Lama Konchog, whose biography I'm working back on, I worked on it 12 years ago. Now I'm working on it again. He lived in the mountains naked, 6 foot of snow, in a hole in the wall, no possessions, no food, no sleep, and no clothes. And he was in bliss. If you're at that level, fine. But meanwhile, be at our own level, but make the most of it. See it as a fruit of karma, understand it has no intrinsic nature, do it with bodhicitta, then you create bucket loads more virtue from every moment of the result of your past, and you create even more. That's what practice is. That's the point. What's the next question?
Thank you so much, Venerable. One.
Go.
I'm getting there. So is it achieving awareness of attachment that is enough, or should the practice to get rid of the attachment be our end goal, or are both the same?
No, they're not the same, completely different. I mean, you've got to be, we get a bit, I'm not suggesting you're saying this, but we get a little bit nihilistic with what we call mindfulness, being aware. There's a certain kind of practice where you watch your mind and you're aware. There's anger, there's jealousy, there's this. This is necessary. But to leave it there is nihilistic. That's like looking in your garden. Well, there's a weed and there's a herb, and you walk away. How idiotic. You've got to have an action after that. The action is pull out the weeds and grow the damn flowers, grow the herbs. So the first step has to be conscious. Yeah, absolutely. But often we over-exaggerate the importance of that and leave it there. That's nihilism. Of course, you've got to get rid of it. But there's, on the bodhisattva path, there are very great skillful ways we can transform and use attachment. But the very first level is to have this awareness. I mean, like in your garden, you've got to learn botany. You've got to be able to distinguish a weed from a herb. But then the thing is, what's the action? The action is pull out a weed and grow the herb. Same with the mind. Absolutely. And at least it's not as simple as that. So what we've got to do is be aware of the attachment. And if it's a really gross, obvious one, the next step is you don't follow it. Oh my goodness. That's the whole point. Of course it is. But it's hard work. Of course, absolutely. There's a big difference. What's next?
That's all the questions for today.
Oh, okay. All right. So then we go home, and I'll not go to bed yet. 8 o'clock, 8:07. It's night out there. It's chilly out there, I think. Okay, you people, it's only noon, isn't it? On a Saturday. So, I mean, I haven't even bothered about the football anymore. I've given up on the bloody Sydney Swans. I've won about 2 games in the year, and they're all locked up in Queensland, aren't they? You guys don't know about the AFL, do you, in Sydney?
Be a grand final in Brisbane.
Already the grand final?
No, it's going to be played in Brisbane.
Who's playing? Who's going to be in it this year?
I'm guessing Geelong, Richmond.
Oh, really? Okay. Good luck to them. Okay. I mean, I didn't even bother this year. I used to watch, but now I can't be bothered. Okay, you people. Thank you so much. We'll just do our little dedication. Here we've gone. 2 hours, gone like a dream. All these thoughts we've had. Every thought is left in your mind. There's not a single thought that goes astray. Okay, so be happy with that. We don't remember 99% of it, including me. They've all gone in. So we think how amazing. We'll nourish these seeds we've planted based on our initial motivation. We're listening to these teachings so we can take these tools, so we can develop ourselves, so we can help others. How marvelous. So we remember that. We think, okay, all these seeds we planted, we're going to nourish them from this second forward when we eat our dinner and go off and have your lunch at noon. Don't forget all this. Apply bodhicitta. We haven't talked about that yet. Apply emptiness, apply non-attachment, apply all these things. Have this view of karma. This becomes the lenses through which you see your world, And then we delight that we've done this work, one step closer to enlightenment. for our sake and the sake of others. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Me Pa Yang, Gong Ne Gong Du Pava Shog. May we never develop, even for a moment, wrong views towards the deeds of our most precious teachers, with faith and respect, gained from seeing their goodness. May their full inspiration flow into our hearts. Okay. Well, there's Anna. Anna's in Sydney. Anna's a Sydney Swans barrack. Look at it too. You give it up on the Sydney Swans, Anna? Have you been going? Well, you don't care. It's your husband, isn't it? Unmute.
No, we're still watching. We're still watching. Keeping we're from Melbourne, remember? Melbourne people don't abandon their teams.
So what do the Swans do this weekend? Did they win or lose?
No, they just lost to Carlton.
Oh, okay.
Oh, they're losing regularly.
I know. I've heard that.
You savor the wins.
What?
Savor the wins.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's right. Okay, you people. I'll see some of you tomorrow. Good luck. And if you die between now and tomorrow, which is possible, then you just be happy that maybe these seeds grow and will continue next life. Don't worry about it. Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, darlings. Thanks, Rain. I'll see you all tomorrow. Some of you tomorrow.
See you in the morning, yes.
Bye, sweetheart. Bye. And bye, all you people on YouTube whom I can't see. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Rain.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone. See you in the morning. If you have any questions, just email me.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.